Orgasmic enlightenment, where the sexual and spiritual come together. I'm Kim Anami, and I'm a holistic sex and relationship coach and a vaginal weightlifter. In this show, we explore all things intimate. I believe that our sexual energy is life force, creative energy, and we can use it to shape our worlds, strengthen our relationships, and self-actualize. I blend the most avant-garde information from neuroscience, ancient sexual practices like Tantra and Taoism, to renegade wellness modalities to show you how to create gourmet sex in your lives. Come one, come all. Natural birth equals ecstatic birth. The best birth expert in the world is you. Your body is your best expert. Today on the podcast, I have a supreme expert in pregnancy and birth. A woman. Yes, women are expert in these things. Their bodies are expert in these things. Yes, it so happens that this particular woman has birthed eight of her own babies, most of them at home and free birthed, meaning she has not enlisted any kind of outside so-called expert support, such as a doctor or a midwife. She's had her partner, some close friends, her children, and maybe a few family pets as her birth attendants. And she also has 20 years experience facilitating the birth of other women's babies. But the main reason I'm calling her an expert is because by very nature of being a woman, she is one. Human females are the only species to be convinced that they cannot birth their own children without it being a major medical emergency. The truth is, women's bodies are designed in a beautiful orchestra of hormones and biofeedback to have blissful, orgasmic, self-actualizing birth experiences. What interferes with this is the typical hospital setting. And I've written about how the most dangerous place in the world to give birth is an American hospital. It's true. Statistically speaking, more babies and mothers die in the US than in any other developed country in the world in hospitals. The whole topic is one I've become particularly impassioned about. It's obviously directly related to sexuality in that this is the outcome, but there are many other parallels as well, in the sense that women's true power and pleasure in these acts from sex to birth, and yes, I'm saying that ultimately nature designed birth to be as pleasurable and even more pleasurable than sex. Yes, I'm saying that birth is supposed to be blissful and orgasmic, just the way that all women can have vaginal orgasms, G-spot orgasms, cervical orgasms. All women are capable of having blissful, empowering births. Yet, these powers have been removed from them. So, in this episode, we'll talk about how to set the stage for the most optimal birth conditions, and I'll be doing several episodes on this in the coming weeks, and talking to women and having them share their stories of deeply pleasurable, transformational, all-natural births, as nature intended. And I will preface all of this information by saying that in no way am I blaming or shaming women for whatever birth experience they've had. I am absolutely blaming and shaming an allopathic OBGYN system which discounts the instinctual power of a woman's body and manufactures birth emergencies simply to reinforce their own position of power and employment. So I'm initiating these discussions because women and their partners need to know that there is a safe, gentle, pleasurable alternative to surgical technobirth. And this is a woman and her genetically encoded self that has been doing this for millennia, hundreds, thousands of millennia. Mother knows best. Today's guest is Yolanda Norris Clark. As I said, she is mother to 8 children, all of which were home birthed and 7 of which were free birthed, meaning that she cared for her body holistically throughout pregnancy and birthed at home with only her family and or non-medically trained friends present for emotional support. She came to recognize that she had a sacred mission to open this secret and to share the power of birth as the portal to one of the most profound experiences of awakening and planetary connection available to human beings. And also that birth itself is the foundation for peace. Peaceful babies, happy mothers, connected parenting, and healthy relationships and marriages. She's also supported hundreds of other women to choose the same path. First as a full spectrum birth attendant, witnessing births throughout her community, and now as a birth coach and consultant, working with women and families all over the world. You can find her at freebirth.ca. Welcome, Yolanda. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Hi, Kim. It's wonderful to be here.
So you are a great proponent of the whole natural birth, physiological birth process. You've had 6 children of your own. So not only does being a woman simply qualify you as an expert, but someone who's a definite regular purveyor of the medium also. So why don't you walk us through what we know to be the absolute natural and inbred, encoded system of birth hormonally, and how our bodies are meant to do this with our pure instinct.
Right. Well, actually, Kim, I've given birth to 8 babies. So close, but not quite. So I have 6 little ones at home right now. My 2 older ones are big. But yeah, I'm quite the pro, and really I call myself a pro because I've just had a lot of babies and I've witnessed many births, but my expertise really lies in my understanding of the process as a mother. And birth is just so amazing. And as you say, we're animals, and like every mammal, human beings are hardwired not only to give birth spontaneously, but really to be imprinted by the process of instinctive birth itself, which, when undisturbed, really lays the physiological foundation for love and attachment and really easeful mothering. And when the complex, intricate structure of hormonal and chemical reactions that take place during birth is disrupted or disturbed, this can really compromise the safety of both the mother and the baby. And this can really have an enormous effect on the lives of that mother-baby unit, because we are a unit, mothers and babies together. So this can affect our attachment, it can affect breastfeeding, how the mother feels after her birth, and just generally the postpartum experience, which lasts a lifetime, right? And her, entire instinctive experience of motherhood as a whole. So birth really does matter to me, anyway.
So can you walk us through the physiological process? So what's the difference then in terms of how we're meant to birth naturally and let this process kick in versus when women step into, let's say, a hospital setting, and what impact that can have on this natural flow and process?
Right. So as I said, the physiological birth process is very complex, and it involves this amazing kind of interweaving of hormonal reactions, kind of a chain reaction, if you will. And when we disrupt the birth process in any way, this can have a major effect. And I think what a lot of people don't realize is that disruptions of any kind can impact on the hormonal flow, which is really so important. So even from the very first step outside of our sphere of home and safety, the hormones of birth require a certain context in order for that to function properly. So let's take oxytocin, for example. So oxytocin is the hormone of love. It's released during hug, it spikes during orgasm. Um, but the very highest peak level of oxytocin that's ever emitted during anyone's lifetime occurs during the birth process and immediately postpartum. Now, during that birth process, the body's production of oxytocin is really dependent on certain factors, and they're primarily environmental. So, if the mother experiences fear, for example, uh, or the presence of strangers, or bright lights, or anything that can trigger adrenaline at the wrong time, her cortisol levels will rise, and this in turn will diminish her body's ability to produce oxytocin. And this can cause her birth process to stall or to stop. And this is something that we see happen all the time in the hospital. So a mother can be at home and she's experiencing the first sensations of birth, and everything seems to be going really well. And then, she decides, or someone in her vicinity decides, that it's time to go to the hospital because it seems like the baby's coming. Um, and then she leaves her home and gets into her car, and all of a sudden everything can stop. And, this is seen as a big problem in the hospital. So this is one of the reasons why such a huge proportion of births are augmented with synthetic oxytocin. But rather than a problem, this is actually a brilliant adaptation, because giving birth when we feel fear, if we're being chased, or if we're being harassed or abused, or if we have to have conversations with people, this is really maladaptive. It doesn't really work. So just stepping outside of our homes is really the first intervention, and that again can cause a cascade of negative reactions and responses in the body that can really inhibit that essential flow of hormones that leads a woman from one stage of birth to the next, and really ensures the safety of the process. So I think one of the problems in our culture is that birth practitioners who work within the system have the best of intentions, but I think often they don't really even understand what a physiological birth even looks like. And so it's impossible to really protect that framework if we don't have a solid understanding of what it is and how it works. So oxytocin is just one example, but there are so many hormones that work together to create a safe and smooth and spontaneous birth. And any disruption, from leaving one's home to having to kind of pop out of that sort of ancient lizard brain that, again, is conducive to allowing that flow of hormones to work, can inhibit the entire structure of birth. And I think that's one of the big reasons why we're in the situation we're in.
Right. And it's kind of ironic that the more safe place where we can allow that birth to take place is in the home, as you're saying, where oxytocin is nurtured, where like having that space of being able to open and to trust and to relax is most going to be available in a safe environment. And I've often used this analogy when I'm talking about this, is like when you say, like, people can relate to having a dog or a cat, as a pet, right? And when they're pregnant and they're going to give birth, they don't climb up onto the kitchen table and ask to be strapped down and a bunch of bright lights shone on top of them. That would freak the animal out to no end and probably stop the entire birth process. Instead, the animal looks instinctively for some kind of dark, private space, maybe in a closet, under a bed, under your deck, and gives birth there by itself, undisturbed, right? In this quiet place where it can literally go inside of itself and tune into the process and allow its body to do what it's meant to do. And I'm going to pull from some of your Instagram quotes, your pithy Instagram truisms here. And one of the ones I really like is, birth does not require that we trust our bodies, just that we surrender. And so I'm going to let you unpack that a bit. But I mean, the way that I interpret that is we just have to be open to the wisdom that's already there. And we are living in a time where we are conditioned away from our natural instincts in so many ways. And there's this entire message through the obstetric community and practice, that I rail against all the time in my work, which is that women can't do these things. They can't have normal periods. They can't have normal births. They can't have normal or pleasurable menopause. And we can help you. We can give you pills for that. We can give you surgeries for that. But your body is pretty fucked up, apparently, and isn't able to do these things on its own. And that's why I push back against that community so much and that idea so much, because I've got decades of experience and thousands of women and thousands of vaginas that show us otherwise, if not hundreds of thousands at this point of people who've had success by learning how to tune into the wisdom and the power of their own bodies and not having to be reliant on an outside source for answers.
Oh, absolutely. And I have experienced a similar phenomenon in my work. I've been in the birth world for, almost 20 years now, and I've been witnessing births for, about a decade, regularly. And I just know that women can give birth. And it's funny that you referenced the quote that I shared on Instagram, because I have given birth to 8 babies, as I said, and I don't trust the process. I mean, I do, but I do in a way, but in those moments of um, intensity, I experience just as much fear, and sometimes terror, but also, euphoria. There's just, birth is everything, right? But I wouldn't say that I am especially trusting of the process. I mean, it scares me too. It's such an otherworldly and yet so grounded and rooted experience. And, I think when you talk about the way the system works, I think if industrial birth practitioners didn't disrupt and sabotage birth from the very beginning, it would really be difficult for them to receive compliance for the procedures that they're, mandated to enact on women and babies, especially after the birth, right? I mean, if a woman who's had an undisturbed birth would, you know, we would kill anyone who tried to come and, take our babies. Like, that is what is also encoded and hardwired into our bodies as mammals. Um, uh, I remember my first birth. It was a very long and difficult birth, but also very ecstatic. And I'd given birth, and, I held my baby during that golden hour immediately postpartum, but then I had to go pee. So I gave my baby to my partner to hold, and I kind of hobbled to the bathroom, and I sat down on the toilet, and I was suddenly flooded with adrenaline and fear and rage, and I burst into tears, and I immediately demanded my baby. And of course, my partner complied. He brought my baby to me right away. And I grabbed him, and I was panting, and I put him to my breast, and then I peed, and it was fine. But, in that moment, I would have killed someone, literally, had my baby not been immediately brought to me. So again, all of these, we're designed to be able to give birth, and then we're designed to be able to mother our babies after the fact. And I think we have to get away from, as you said, this idea of having a really intellectual understanding of birth. I mean, that can help, I think, considering the situation we're in, because we are fed so many myths about what birth is like. But ultimately, we give birth with our biology and not our intellect, right? So this idea of, like, well, trusting birth, we have to trust birth. Not really. Uh, we really do just have to surrender, and we can still experience fear and, have a great, wonderful, safe birth. But when the process is modified to the extent that it is within these systems that we've established in our culture, um, birth just can't work as well. That's
So
just
let's
how
let's
it is.
dive into yeah, so let's dive into more of the hormonal process there. So with when oxytocin, natural oxytocin in the woman, is allowed to flow and do its job, it creates feelings of, you said, like the highest level of oxytocin ever. And this comes out of the work of Dr. Sarah Buckley, who's really researched the physiological imprinting behind all of this, comes at birth. It's like what she said, like a 50 or 100 times more than orgasm. It's if allowed to go undisturbed. So the kinds of orgasms I'm often talking to women about are vaginal orgasms, G-spot orgasms, cervical orgasms. And if you look at the cervix, well, birth is going to be the largest orgasm potentially of a woman's entire life. And I love that there's this awareness now of this parallel, and that birth was intended to be this way. And so when oxytocin is allowed to flow, that's where we can actually generate these feelings of bliss and ecstasy and transcendence and openness, the cervix being this portal between life and death. And so we'll talk more in a moment about the whole spiritual experience for women that's available to them of rebirth and transformation, rebirthing themselves. But let's first go into this hormonal flow. So when that's allowed to happen, how the oxytocin then generates pain relief, natural pain relief. And the problem with cutting off the oxytocin and then, say, supplementing it with synthetic pitocin is that it actually generates more pain for the woman. And so this entire natural process that's meant to shield and protect and guide a woman through the entire birth is now interrupted. And so that then facilitates this dependence on these outer measures, because the woman's natural process is now sabotaged, as you say. And so the woman thinks that now, okay, I had to do all these things because my body just stopped. Yes, your body stopped because it was being shut down, from the outside. And so, or from, the outside environment was preventing this proper flow of oxytocin that's really the ringleader, is really the guide and the director of the entire birth process if left undisturbed.
That's right. Yeah. And I think we really underestimate the degree to which these small interferences, rather than, there's sort of make the distinction between interventions, which are, very clear and direct, and we know what those are. It's like,
well, what are they? Just for our audience, like, what would we consider to be interventions?
Right. So when a woman arrives at the hospital, there's a certain process that starts to take place. So often she'll have a vaginal exam, right? That's an intervention because that's not a normal thing. It's not normal to have, I say normal, but it's become normal. It's very invasive when you're trying to have a baby to have strangers putting their hands inside your vagina. And this is rationalized in the system as a necessity. We need to check your cervix. We have to, be able to determine how dilated your cervix is. And this is a really huge misconception because it actually doesn't really give us very much information. Having someone put their hands inside our vaginas to determine how many centimeters supposedly our cervix is dilated, that doesn't tell us anything about what is going to happen in the next 10 minutes or the next 10 hours. So a woman's cervix can be 2 centimeters dilated one moment, and she can be fully dilated then in 30 minutes. A woman's cervix can sit at 5 centimeters dilated for 3 weeks before she ends up giving birth. So, having someone put their hands in her vagina it's really an arbitrary thing, but it's become so enmeshed in the system that it's a given. We've been enculturated to expect this, but that's going to have a huge impact on.
Sorry, just that it's also then this symbolic way of giving away power, right? Immediately you're like to sit down, open your legs, have a stranger or a number of strangers examine you and tell you where you're at, right? And so this is this immediate secession of power. Oh, no, you have the power. I don't have the power.
Of course. This is a way to groom a woman when she enters the hospital into submission, because the entire the game of industrial birth is submission, right? So that initial violation of her body when she first enters the hospital kind of sets the tone for what she can expect. And it's humiliating to have a stranger put their hands inside your vagina. I mean, this is our most private place, especially during the birth process when our bodies are supposed to be flooded with the hormone of love, oxytocin. It really is a very, very detrimental kind of experience. And, it's interesting because it's like it's designed, to be a certain way. It's very purposeful, right? As you said, you know, it's it's designed to take a woman's power so that she will then feel comfortable, or not feel comfortable, but come to expect that kind of process of submission. So, and that has an effect on our psyche. It has an effect on our emotional state, and it also, in turn, has an effect on our body. So I think we're still functioning under this notion that there's this sort of duality, right? Like there's mind and body, and we know that they're one. And so anything that happens like that to a woman when she enters the hospital, that has a physiological result as well. So, um, you mentioned so that's kind of one of the first things that can happen. That's going to, maybe cause her to have some fear. And so if she's feeling scared above and beyond what the intensity of birth itself will produce, then that's going to unbalance her hormones. It's going to impede the flow of oxytocin. It's going to raise her cortisol levels. Cortisol will tamp down the production of oxytocin as well. And that's often when, oh, gee, well, her birth process has kind of started to stall. Gee, what are we going to do about that? So, of course, that's often when, a birth process is augmented. That's one of the nice kind of euphemisms that are used in the hospital system. And, as you know, Kim, synthetic oxytocin, Pitocin, behaves very differently in the body than does natural oxytocin. So synthetic oxytocin does not pass the blood-brain barrier, and it actually inhibits the body's natural production of oxytocin. So essentially, when we're on a pit drip, a pitocin drip, the body gets the message that, oh, okay, we don't need any more of that stuff. So, let's shut it off, right? And researchers like obstetrician Michel Audin, who is a French doctor, he hypothesizes that the shutdown of natural oxytocin production actually affects the way mothers relate to our infants after birth, because um, the spike in oxytocin happens at the moment of birth, but also actually right after the baby is born, and that's what helps the placenta to shear away from the side of the uterus safely and emerge. And at the same time, that's when the mother is designed, programmed to look at her baby and smell her baby and fall in love with her baby. So that's really the peak level of oxytocin comes right during the emergence of the baby and right after. And so if a woman is on Pitocin and her natural oxytocin production is shut down, her brain is not receiving those same signals. And I've had heartbreaking conversations with women who have told me that, oxytocin, synthetic oxytocin is also injected into a woman's body, ostensibly to halt postpartum bleeding or to prophylactically prevent excessive postpartum bleeding. Now, that's another topic altogether. I don't want to get too into that, but I've had conversations with mothers who have given birth to their babies and in the hospital and felt that flood of love for their babies, and then they've experienced the synthetic oxytocin injection, and they've immediately kind of felt a distance from their infants and that they no longer kind of feel connected. And Audin is hypothesizing that we may be looking at a generation of people whose hormonal love receptors are actually damaged. And you look at the state of the world at times on certain
Hmm.
days, and I think like that can make some sense, right? So I think that again we're functioning under this notion that all of these modifications that we do to birth are not that big a deal. And, women, especially in our free birth community, we hear from women all the time who are told that, the choices that they make are kind of selfish and, arbitrary and like, don't you want a healthy baby? But we don't seem to understand on a wider cultural level that these modifications that we're making to birth actually may be having a very, very significant effect, not only on individual relationships, relationships between mothers and their babies, but obviously we carry those effects into our adulthood, and this impacts on our ability to relate to each other as adults, but also on a wider cultural level. I think it's changed society, and that's something to really think about for sure.
Absolutely. I think there are far reaching effects with that. Let's return back to that process because there's another piece to this that I want to address. And so, with that natural flood of oxytocin in the body, that also facilitates breastfeeding. And so this is what a woman is meant to do after she has a baby, is to connect and nurture her baby, both energetically and physiologically, with breast milk, which has massive, massive immune seeding qualities. And so not just nourishment, for food, but it's like populating her, the microbiome of the infant. So it's massively important. And so when this oxytocin process has been interrupted, women can often experience difficulty with letdown or with breastfeeding afterward, because this is a massive part of the flow, the hormonal flow that goes from one stage to another stage. And so women can think that, oh, and again, this becomes this rationalization. Like, I hear this similar rationalization so much in my work sexually, like, oh, you're just one of those women who doesn't know how to orgasm or can't orgasm. Don't worry about it. It's okay. And that very similar pat on the head is given to women in terms of breastfeeding. Oh, and because there's a very convenient, paid for alternative, which is formula, which isn't really an alternative to breast milk, but it's a whole other topic. But this interference then prevents that response, and then it can be rationalized with, oh, it's okay, you're just one of those women who can't do it. Well, if I don't know what the percentage is exactly, but I mean, if like this many women can't do it, we have a real problem with the species. But anyway, but we know the source of that problem is most likely 99% of the time that they were interfered with in that process. And so that prevents the real production of their milk flow.
Absolutely. So when the oxytocin system is disrupted, again, that's the hormone of love. That's what kind of, initiates that sense of euphoric adoration for our babies. And if that's not there, like there's not much, there's less of an impetus to pick our babies up and nurture them immediately. And this is a complicated issue because there are so many factors that are involved. But what I see in birth and what I've experienced myself is that um, when I give birth to my babies, um, there's just no question that I would bring them to my breast. Like it is completely instinctive. And we see in the hospital as well, not only is the flow of oxytocin disrupted, but babies are removed from their mothers, and again, there's so much that happens prior to that that kind of facilitates the it kind of sets the stage for the woman to submit to that. So all of these little interventions, all of the interferences. Um, uh, have this effect of damaging their hormonal system. And prolactin, which is the hormone that facilitates breastfeeding and that causes letdown, it doesn't just it's not just about breastfeeding. What's so fascinating about that hormone in particular is that it actually allows women to tolerate um, monotony. And that sounds kind of like a downer, but actually what it is that, mothering involves these repetitious activities, right? You're just like mothers are constantly nursing their babies through the first, few months of a baby's life. And um, breastfeeding allows that process of constant nurturing to actually be pleasurable. And of course, during a breastfeeding session, mothers are also producing oxytocin as well. So all of these systems are completely intermingled and each is dependent on the other. Um, and so, yeah, I mean, it really makes sense that if birth is disrupted, then all of the other kind of attendant mothering tasks and experiences, there's going to be a disruption there as well. Um, and, uh, you know, humans are so incredible. Unlike animals, we don't just function off of instinct, right? Like we have intellect and consideration and this whole sort of cerebral conception of things. So, unlike animals, we don't just love our children instinctively. We also choose to love them. And that's an incredibly powerful force. So for every woman who becomes enraged by the idea that, for example, her surgical birth might have had an effect on her baby or on her or her experience of mothering, there are like 6 other women who will message me privately and say that, they deeply adore their child, but it took them a week or a month to really feel that visceral love. And breastfeeding was really, really hard. And their recovery from surgery made things really difficult on their relationships. Sex is not the same, and on and on and on. And so, I don't think we really recognize just how profoundly the experience of birth really affects every aspect of our lives as women, not just as mothers, but every single aspect of our lives. And, women, I think, know that something is missing. And this also points to how profound our instinct really is as well, because there are so many women who feel that sense of loss, even if it's not quite conscious and even if they can't quite articulate it. Yeah, and there's no standard experience of birth, but in 20 years working with women and being in the birth world, it's really my knowing that the way we do birth has an effect. And we can't ever be sure what that effect will be on our lives. Different women have different experiences, but we can make some really dependable assumptions about how our choices are going to impact on our lives when it comes to birth. And, the choices we make can really optimize, not ensure or guarantee, but optimize the chances of certain outcomes. So if we want a vital and healthy experience of breastfeeding, then we need to be looking at what's happening during our birth process that can either support that goal or undermine it.
And that even extends into the afterbirth experience, where the ideal and I think the unimpeded hormonal directive would be that the woman feels a sense of euphoria and bliss and, wonderment and pleasure, like she's really had this spiritual portal that she's gone through. And that the opposite of that is when women have postpartum depression. And this is a great quote from you, where you say terms like postpartum depression and the baby blues serve to normalize the PTSD that women experience after giving birth, obfuscating the fact that it's obstetric violence and an absence of loving, compassionate support that causes depression after childbirth and the not motherhood or the birth process itself. And I would agree with that, is that isn't normal, but it's become normalized. And it's become normalized because it's so many women's experiences that they have these very interfered with births. So it becomes normal to go to the hospital, to have these exams, to have Pitocin, to have an epidural, to have a C-section. We have a C-section rate in the US of 33%. In some hospitals, it's 50 to 80%. And so that becomes a normal experience. And statistically, it's borne out that women who have these experiences do have higher rates of postpartum depression. And of course they do, And so I'd say both from the kind of shock of what they've gone through, and that their body simply wasn't allowed to go through the process it was designed to. And so it's trying to put the pieces back together. I'd say both the woman spiritually, energetically, emotionally, psychologically, but even physiologically. It's trying to reconfigure itself when, its very instincts and millennia worth of experience has just been shunted to the side, and it's trying to figure out how to put the pieces back together.
Absolutely. I mean, our nature as human beings is it's love, right? So, when you look at these epidemic rates of surgical birth or birth by knife, as midwife Sister Morningstar refers to C-sections. I just spent the weekend with her, and she's lovely. And it's sort of epidemic rates of mothers and babies, or mother babies as a unit, that are drugged during birth. Epidemic rates of babies who go without a complete relationship with their mothers through breastfeeding. And then we look at these rates of postpartum depression, and then further on in life, I don't know, porn addiction in general, sexual dysfunction, whatever. All of it really makes a lot of sense to me. And I don't, I'm not drawing a direct causation between any one thing and another. There are, again, so many factors to this. But there's no doubt in my mind that there's a relationship. I mean, I see it all the time. And it's really everywhere. And I've had the enormous and really radical experience of having done a lot of kind of rewilding of myself through birth. And I think I have a kind of a relatively unique knowing. And I think understanding and knowing is kind of a different thing. Like when I scream my babies into the world, and I pick them up from between my thighs, covered in blood and meconium, and I lift them to my heart, like the animal that I am, and my body is just flooded with rapture and bliss beyond any post-orgasm that I've ever experienced. And then my baby's nurse, and we spend the next 6 months in interdependent love, needing each other and feeding each other so easily, still riding that birth high. Despite, in my experience as well, despite a lack of support that I think is real for all of us to a degree, because I'm in the world, I lead a slightly fractured existence like everyone. It still tells me something really powerful, and I hear that from other women too. I've been watching this for 20 years, that I can see a general distinction between the experience of mothering for women who have had that relatively undisturbed kind of birth experience that really isn't possible to experience in an industrial setting. I think it really does make a difference. And the whole term postpartum depression really bothers me, because it's like this very specific form of depression is assumed to be just simply a normal outcome of the birth process. And it's not. Birth is supposed to be ecstatic. It really is. It's supposed to be blissful. It's supposed to, make us want to have more babies.
Right.
And mothering is supposed to be pleasurable, and it can be. And that's not to say that it always is, even for women who've had spontaneous births. I get into a lot of trouble because, I make these grand pronouncements about birth that are absolutely true for me. But I completely understand that there's a variety of experiences. But I think what it is that, again, there are so many variables, and women aren't supported in birth and postpartum. So, I mean, it's a tricky thing for sure. But in general, again, we're animals, and you look at the animal world, and birth and mothering are not supposed to be these terrifyingly punishing experiences that leave us feeling destroyed. It's just not supposed to be like that, and it doesn't have to be like that.
Right. And it makes sense that if women have that imprinting through the birth experience, that that's going to carry over into their experience of motherhood. And that rather than having their instincts kick in and this natural intuition of how to mother. And what I've heard from many women who've birthed naturally is that they have a certain kind of fierceness and protectiveness and energy that's born in them through the process. Because, of course, like you say, if someone was to be a threat to your child, you would have this natural response to kill, literally to kill. And because that's what we would have had to have. That's what animals have. That's completely natural. Like you hear, oh, it's fine if you see a bear in the forest, but if they've got cubs, then that's when you're most likely to be attacked, right? Just out of the blue, because they're going to be in this ultra protective mode. And I love, this is another statement. You're quite poetic in your statements here, but here's another one I really like, which is, we can anesthetize the exquisite and excruciating primal sensations of birth in the short term, but the somatic experience will be etched on our cells and in our psyches one way or another, now or later, either as a loss or a wound or as ecstasy. Nature always acquires its balance, and biology will not be repressed. And so this is what I think most women aren't aware of, because it's really just not in the cultural narrative at all, is that birth is this massive spiritual, self-actualizing, transformative experience for the woman. And it's a huge tool, and I've written about this in my work, that certain portals like menstruation and menopause, anything that's related to opening of the cervix and birth, are these extremely potent experiences. And historically, in ancient cultures and civilizations, like, they looked at these times, that's what women were considered to be, the shamans, naturally, because they had this access to other dimensions through the opening of the cervix, this gateway between the other worlds, between life and death. And men had to go and do vision quests and drugs and these like circles, because they didn't have it. They didn't have it. Women were actually considered to be the spiritually superior being. And I'm not trying to put men down. I'm just trying to create a little, men have their power as well, but I'm just trying to rebalance some of the power that's been removed from women. And so instead, we see that these women, these times in a woman's life are denigrated, right? Menopause, women have to take hormones now. They're all dried up. Periods are terrible, debilitating, depressing, suicide-inducing times. Birth is painful, excruciating, surgical. We've had the exact opposite now in our modern culture. And the thing that I think pains me the most, like I said, is that women now have no clue that this was actually meant to be this self-directing, self-actualizing experience that's truly one of the peaks of a woman's life, or in the time of being in a female body, and that all of that has been removed. And if you try to suggest that, then you get the finger pointed back at you, like, oh, you're blaming women, you're shaming women. No, not at all. Let me be 1,000% clear that who I'm blaming and shaming is the allopathic obstetric profession, not women themselves. Women are just trying to do their best, listen to the so-called experts who have become very much off course.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the allopathic medical system, industrial birth system, it is in part designed to diminish women's power, because imagine if we were powerful, imagine if we felt powerful postpartum, and we felt like just perfectly connected to our babies, and we found mothering to be easeful. We wouldn't need to, I mean, rushing off to the doctor for this, that, and the other, buying all these plastic gadgets to put our babies into, because, it just, the whole system kind of works together. And, I think that birth is always ecstatic. So no matter what kind of birth we have, because if you think about the etymology of the word ecstasy, it comes from well, there are different etymologies, but one of the most powerful one is from the Greek, ancient Greek, and that is ecstasis, and that means displacement, or finding ourselves, outside of what is known, outside of what, that which is firm and solid. It's kind of removal of ourselves from the physical realm, right? Um, and that has to happen during birth, whether you're giving birth at home or you're having a free birth, or you're having, birthing in the hospital. But the difference is that during an industrial birth, what tends to happen is that because the woman's own hormonal system, that again is designed to create this hallucinatory, you know, uh, I think spiritual experience, absolutely. Because the hormonal system is so disrupted by everything that's happening around her, strangers, nurses, doctors, the system is designed to modify and co-opt the birth process. The woman then has to find that ecstasy, that transformation, that trance-like displacement from the now, from an external source. So that's the epidural. That's the opiate drugs that she then reaches for, because giving birth in such a um, uh, just such a foreign and terrifying environment, um, is it's unbearable, So yeah, I think that ecstasy is part of it no matter what. But the spiritual experience of giving birth physiologically is utterly transformative. It's 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 incredible, and I am so grateful to be a woman. I mean, our bodies are absolutely amazing. They are magical, and I'm sure Kim, in the work that you do. Um, when you mentioned the importance of our cervixes and how our bodies work, uh, there are certain gynecological procedures now, the LEAP procedure in particular, like where a chunk of a woman's cervix is removed. Um, just now discovering that this actually has a massive effect on a woman's sexuality. This can impede her ability to even have an orgasm. So all of these procedures, we're really just we don't we don't understand how women's bodies work at all. Gynecologists think they have it all figured out, but our bodies are so brilliant. Another example is that we're just now starting to maybe wonder if our uteruses are in direct communication with our brains, and that our uteruses have an impact on our memory. So we're finding that women who have hysterectomies now are perhaps more prone to memory loss and
Wow.
cognitive issues. So yeah, all of these systems are so interconnected. So when you think about a woman who is in the birth process and she goes into the hospital, or just prior to her birth process, this is another intervention that's become completely standardized. It's called the cervical sweep. So that's when a practitioner will put their fingers inside a woman's vagina and reach up into her cervix and and scrape the kind of connective tissue that sort of adheres the mother's bag of waters, the baby's bag of waters, to the cervix, and they'll scrape around that kind of membrane in hopes that that kind of irritation will prompt the birth process. So this is another issue. We have these epidemic rates
This
of
makes me
induction.
shiver.
Oh, isn't it disgusting? I mean, there's a reason why our babies are protected the way they are. This procedure, this cervical sweep, has no basis in science. It's not evidence-based like so many of these procedures. The industrial obstetric system, they love to talk about, evidence-based practice and, informed consent and all that stuff. And just so much of what they do actually has no basis whatsoever in science, and this is one of the big ones. But when you realize that our sexuality is, we know this, right? Like our yonis, our cervixes, that's all part of our sexual system, and sexuality and spirituality. All of this stuff is so interconnected, and what are we doing? It's absolute madness. And another thing too, when we're talking about oxytocin as well, it's those it's actually stretch receptors in our lower vagina and our lower yoni that trigger a spike in oxytocin as our babies are descending, as our babies are being born. And so it's the baby's head pushing on that part of our body as our baby's heads emerge that creates another spike in oxytocin. So when you think about an epidural, it numbs a woman from the waist down. So that's another aspect of the system that kind of, really erodes that natural sort of biofeedback that, again, sets the stage for our mothering journey. Anyway, I'm just rambling now, but all
No,
of
no,
this
no.
stuff is
It's all
so
related. And, this is, I think the phrase or word you just used, biofeedback, is that's really the whole birth process is this constant biofeedback. And so that's why if we really surrender to it, why women can have painless, ecstatic, pleasurable birth experiences when they truly open to that. And when I coach women in how to get to cervical orgasms, it's really very much the same process of opening and surrendering and letting go and allowing for this portal to open. And that can be scary, right? This is like a spiritual jumping off place into the abyss. And if a woman is afraid, if she's really feeling like she wants to be mentally in control, and like the same thing that I hear over and over again from women who can't get to these orgasms yet is that they have a hard time letting go of control. That would be the number one thing that is preventing them from accessing these places. And so if you have that, which obviously, like, that's part of the process, that's the kind of going through the ring of fire that women have to go through to get there, whether it's a cervical orgasm or a natural birth. And so that's the real prep work in my mind, is this energetic spiritual prep of leaping off into the ethers, like this jumping off point, rather than getting ultrasounds and getting cervical checks and position checks. Like another phrase that you've used that I really like is your baby's positioning is not a pathology. And like this idea that, oh, the baby needs to be in this optimal position, and there's this obsession with this and with the length of labor and due dates in birth. And so again, it's like this antitrust of the whole procedure. The whole process is reinforced every step of the way, right? That you can't trust these things, that the body doesn't know what to do. And so if a woman's coming up against that, understandably, there's a lot of information that she's being bombarded with of all the ways in which she could fuck up this pregnancy and this birth. And if she doesn't do these things, she's going to end up with a severely, either a dead baby, I guess, or a damaged baby. And another thing you say as well that I really like is a healthy, is not having, how do you say it, is not having a dead baby doesn't mean that you have a healthy baby. Or, it's like, it's not one, they're not one and the same. Just because your baby's alive, and that's often the rationale, oh, you had this horrific experience, but oh, your baby's alive. Like, okay, but that doesn't mean that it's necessarily healthy, that it's gone through all of these things, that its process and the mother's process has been severely disrupted. And so, sure, it's alive, but we can do a lot better than that. That shouldn't be our baseline, is, okay, your baby survived this traumatic experience. The experience wasn't meant to be traumatic.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And I'm a huge fan of women doing exactly what they want to do when they want to do it, and I fully support women in choosing whatever birth path they choose. But we're not generally given truthful information with which to actually make an informed choice, right? And what we often see after industrial birth is women who are not just instinct injured, but physically injured. And, often, most often, I think, not always, but often, those injuries really have nothing to do with the underlying process of birth, but they're really inflicted as part of this industrial birth experience. And it's designed specifically to sabotage birth and then to kind of hero the woman out of a danger that was, manufactured by the very
Manufactured,
system
yeah.
that's now positioning itself as the savior, right? So, as a culture, we've been led to believe that this is a problem of nature, but for me, it's the other way around. Nature is the solution. Um, it's my solution. I think for other people, technology and drugs are the solution. Um, and for them, I guess dependency on pharmaceutical companies and drug medication and that whole apparatus, um, it's not a problem, but it is a problem for me. I think it's certainly very subjective. But no, I think our bodies are capable and we're designed to just enjoy the process of life. Like what I really have found, especially during my most recent birth, was just this immense curiosity about the whole process. Like, wow, it's just so amazing that we get to do this. And I said before that I don't always trust the process, and I don't even always want to surrender. And I, feel all the same feelings that so many women do. But I think that we're in this wonderful position now where actually learning about how birth works and having understanding of the physiology of birth can kind of give us an opening to um, just being willing to have the experience. So we all have been really indoctrinated, I think, um, and it can feel really scary to. I think a lot of people interpret, not choosing natural birth or free birth or stepping outside of the system as taking an enormous risk. But when you learn about how birth works, you start to see these processes and procedures in the system very, very differently. And I think the risk um, of losing what the incredible riches that nature offers us, when it comes to what the birth process can do, and that spiritual awakening that the birth process can give us, um, that 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 ends up feeling like maybe more of a risk. um, and it's not all just the spiritual aspect too. I mean, that's a huge aspect of it for me, but just in terms of actual physical safety, like I've truly come to the perspective now in my life after having all these babies and witnessing so many births and being in birth, that quite objectively, I feel much, much safer at home. It's not just that I know that I'm going to be able to experience this, soul awakening that birth does, but also that I'm very, very confident that my baby is going to be safer being born in the peace and sanctity of my home than in the hospital, where again, so many of the procedures that they undertake and um, the strategies that they have are truly counterproductive and very, very frighteningly dangerous when you really look at um, how birth works and the evidence that proves so many of these approaches to be dangerous.
I want to have you go into a little bit more some of these arbitrary impositions, like your baby's position and the due date, where women can feel like they are, if they're not adhering to these very strict kind of guidelines, that they are potentially putting themselves or their child at risk. And what's your perspective on that?
Yeah, so the due date thing is huge, and I'm a mother who tends to give birth to her babies at after around 43 weeks of pregnancy, which is shocking, right? Because a pregnancy is 40 weeks, and after that you're overdue, and it's such an unfortunate way of seeing things. And I think really that it's a pretext for uh, enacting um, industrial birth on women. Um, I think that is really the purpose of the whole due date racket. It's based on, in particular, one very flawed study, I think from the 80s or 90s. But it's just the perfect kind of, it's the perfect fear factor, right? Like if women are told that, well, if you don't get that baby out, your baby's going to die, Who's going to question that? It would be
Mm-hmm.
crazy to question that. And so, uh, it's really, really important for the continued sort of functioning of the industrial obstetric system to ensure that the way that the system is set up is perpetuated. If women had smooth and peaceful births when their babies decide to be born, then obstetricians wouldn't have a heck of a lot to do. So I think that's really what it comes down to for the most part. And it is really, really scary. It's scary to let go of those structures that are seen in our culture, in our society, as normal. And even for me, after having had all these babies, during my last pregnancy that progressed until 43 weeks, by the end of it, I was anxious, definitely anxious. Um, but again, that's part of the that's part of the plan. Um, that sense of heightened awareness and even anxiety, and I was prowling around my home like this sort of wild animal, just hissing at everybody, and uh, that's part of it. It's part of the experience, and it's part of the spiritual experience too, because we are programmed, like the mammals that we are, to get to a certain point of our pregnancies and to be desperate to meet our babies, desperate to encounter our babies. And um and I mean, I just know, I know that women are not machines. Like there is no special day. Like there's no arbitrary date that we need to be imposing on this process. It just doesn't make sense that our bodies would be healthy and vital enough to um, to become pregnant in the first place, and then to grow these babies to a certain point, and then if the baby's not out by Tuesday, like everyone's just gonna, collapse and break. That
Yeah,
that just doesn't
meltdown.
make sense. Like our menstrual cycles are not by the book, by the calendar on the clock, and neither is birth. We're human beings. I mean, it's such a collective madness, really, that has kind of overtaken this culture, and I don't know. It's nuts.
No, I agree fully. So let's end off with you talking about more of this as a spiritual awakening for you, as I've talked about and you've alluded to. Like, what do you feel after 8 babies? Like, how has that transformed you and brought you into yourself? How would you describe how you've changed as being a woman who's home birthed and free birthed? So that means you haven't had outside assistance apart from your family being in your space. And what do you feel like that's done for you?
It's just the most euphoric and gorgeous experience I can describe. The love I feel for my children is beyond, and I think every mother does feel that for their children, no matter what kind of birth she has. But um, I felt really in touch with just the pulse of the world, and an expression of aliveness that's beyond anything else I've ever experienced. And I went through a period uh, between babies, I should say, where I did every drug under the sun, and that was its own trip. But there's nothing else like birth that can offer such a uh, a profoundly kind of connected sense. And I have real confidence as a mother, and that comes from my birth experiences without a doubt. I just don't even know who I would be without the kind of births that I've had. And yeah, birth it really is ecstatic in the most profound sense. Um, yeah. It's a
Fabulous.
very hard question.
Yeah, I
It's such
can
a
see you
personal experience.
going inside because I'm sure it's not something to describe so much with your left brain and your intellect because it's something that you've experienced viscerally and it's transformed you on a cellular level. So you just rebirth into a new version.
Absolutely, yeah, and I love to be able to share my birth experiences with, especially my daughters, my sons as well. I mean, they're all part of my family, and my kids are always with me when I give birth. They're kind of around or in the vicinity, and I think as an extension of that spiritual experience, to be able to see my daughters know birth and understand birth and love birth, and to have no question in their minds that they will grow up and possibly give birth in such power as well is pretty magical. And I mean, this is kind of part of the spiritual aspect too, but um, when you start to kind of understand how powerful birth is and the fact that we all women have that power within us. We all have the capacity to birth, birth our babies, and in doing so, birth ourselves. Um, all of these other kind of societal structures start to sort of fall away, and we become kind of compelled to, question all of this other stuff as well. And I think that might be one of the reasons why, the free birth movement and this sort of autonomous birth movement is so confronting for people, because it's really scary to be in this position of like, wow, so none of that stuff is necessary. And I think there's a sense of power, but also maybe a little bit for a lot of women, a little bit of isolation, because um, it's intimidating to find yourself kind of stepping into your power in that way, and to be sort of forced to question all of these other structures. Um, but Yeah, birth is just everything, and birth is definitely such a profound spiritual experience, but it also incorporates sort of every other emotion that's possible as a human being. So it's just everything all at once. It's a spiritual journey. It's hilarious. It's fun. It's ridiculous. It's terrifying. I mean, it involves so much darkness as well, and that can be challenging. But it really encompasses all of life, and I just love it. I just love birth so much,
Well,
and
you
I'm
keep
so
doing it, so
grateful.
you clearly do.
I'm so grateful to be a woman. I keep doing it. I know. I'm going to have to stop at some point, but being in the world of authentic midwifery really, really helps. And yeah, it's amazing. Our bodies are amazing.
Well, I love what you said, is it having as well this far-reaching impact into, I'd say, busting illusions, right? Like you come into this sense of truth and your own power and your own abilities, and that translates into the rest of your life, where you have, I'd say, a more clear lens to be able to pierce through illusion and understand what you can do. You've got such a strong sense. I mean, you just birthed a baby into the world. And so, like, the ultimate act of expression and facilitation of this power and connection with the universe. And once you know that, and you know that that's within you, you become unstoppable. You have a certain
It's
kind of confidence and power about yourself that you can't get any other way.
That's so true. And I wanted to say one more just quick thing that we didn't really go into, Kim, but you are a sex therapist, and your podcast is all about sexual ecstasy and sexual power. And I just want to put it out there to your listeners that I've had 8 babies, and my yoni just is so beautiful, and it works so brilliantly. And with several of my babies, I had such wonderful, straightforward births that I felt such an intimate connection with my husband, and we made love the next day after one of my babies were born. And I think there's this idea that birth just wrecks our bodies, and like your vagina is going to be just kind of a disaster, um, and that's definitely not the case. I think that the way that we give birth well, it certainly does have an impact on our sexual selves, and I I think for me anyway that the way that I've chosen to give birth has, brought so much richness to um, the intimate relationship I have with my beloved, and um, it's just been, yeah, it's been fantastic. So, we like to sort of decouple birth from sexuality, which is insane because that's how babies get there. But birth is a really profoundly sexual experience in a way as well. Um, there's a lot I could say about that, but it's kind of a different topic. Yeah, it's
Well, I'm so glad that you added that because it's so true that it's really been polarized in our culture, and the whole orgasmic birth movement and even this idea of physiological birth really is suggesting then that having more intimacy, having sensuality through the birth process is going to help and ease the passage of the baby and make it a more pleasurable experience and really bring it into that realm of orgasmic. And I love that you shared that. Thank you for sharing that intimate detail that you made love with your partner the day after having a baby, because I'm sure most people's jaws just fell to the floor. Because you're right, because there is this notion that birth wrecks your body and your vagina is going to be out of commission for a very long time. And yet, in maybe a more optimal circumstance, that isn't the case, and that's not how things are meant to go.
Yeah, I mean, there's such a variety. I've had all of the experiences. So, I had a birth where, I did need to wait. And again, women need to really be listening to their bodies and responding to
Sure.
what
Yeah.
is true for them for sure. But no, in some cases, yeah, I felt so amazing after one of my births, and my body was in integrity, and yeah, there was no reason not to. It was wonderful.
And have you used sensuality as a tool in your births? That been a natural part of your experience?
Oh my goodness, yeah, and that's one of the big differences too, I think, between giving birth autonomously in our space as the sole authority of the experience versus being in an industrial, sterile environment surrounded by strangers and bright lights. It's just, I mean, it's very difficult to feel free. And um, I don't know if I would say that I've used sensuality in my births. It's just an inevitability in the kinds of experiences
Mm.
that I've had. And that goes back to I didn't really get there yet, but positioning. Women are so terrified of the position that their babies happen to be in, after an ultrasound or what have you, and I think that this whole uh, this entire kind of idea of positioning being so, like scary, and oh my goodness, is my baby posterior? Oh dear, oh dear. That has arisen as a result of the fact that when we go into the hospital, we are either told what to position, told how to lie or where to be, or we're debilitated by an epidural, or we're just in such a foreign atmosphere that we feel really inhibited. Um, because I think that if women were generally giving birth in their homes with that feeling of freedom and authority, if you understand birth, if you see women giving birth in the wild or in the relative wild, their homes, women are just inevitably sensual. We're inevitably, changing position constantly, dancing through our sensations, undulating our hips, up and down, and hands and knees, and jumping around and dancing. Like that is what birth is. So this idea of like, oh, well, can we kind of utilize different positions to, help our babies themselves move into position? That wouldn't even be a discussion if we were giving birth spontaneously. I mean, sensuality is part of birth. And I think, what women have to do to survive industrial birth is to not consciously, but but we're kind of forced to inhibit our sensuality in that kind of industrial atmosphere. So it's, that's another really unfortunate result. But birth is, oh my goodness, birth is sensuality, and I feel so lucky and so privileged to be able to have had this experience of, the creation of life just being this continuum. Like, I'm with my beloved, we make love, we make a baby, I'm pregnant, I live my life and it's lovely, and then I give birth and I'm, sensually connected to my infants in a similar way. It just flows, and, life can just flow. And, birth is this, can be this portal to experiencing life as a kind of flow. And I think for me, having as many children as I have, sure, I'm in the world, I have to pay bills and life can get chaotic, but, I think I feel generally pretty in touch with that flow as a mother as well. And, it all kind of comes from, birth is the origin. Women are the beginning. We make life. And I talk about this a lot, but I think we give birth in a way that kind of expresses the totality of our lives. And the way we give birth, again, just has this impact on everything that we're about. And culturally, the way a culture does birth really speaks to that culture's values. And I want to give birth as an expression of who I really am. And that's the other really cool thing about birth too. Like, I've seen I've witnessed so many women give birth, and, the structure of physiological spontaneous birth is very similar. We've got this sort of general stages, and, women start off and, it's kind of like, oh, kind of, exciting, sweet sensations. And then we move into the, the harder work of the baby moving down, and then, and then we're like kind of screaming and raging, or some women don't, but it's sort of a general, thing, and then the baby emerges. So the overarching physiology of birth it's so very similar across women, across cultures, across species when it comes to mammals in terms of physiology. Different in the hospital because it's because of all the mediations we already talked about. But in terms of individual women, like, when we are fully supported in our power, when we are given the the respect of our own authority, when we are in the privacy, the safety of our homes, birth is an expression of, like, our deepest, truest, most beautiful personalities, and we just give birth exactly who we are. And it's so amazing to see that in myself, to see my own courage and my own, self-expressiveness, and, how funny and charming and wonderful I am. Like, birth in our power makes us fall in love with ourselves. And I think that it's much harder to experience that in an industrial setting.
That's so beautiful. I love that it's this opportunity to fall deeper in love with yourself. Well, thank you so much for all of your sharing and your wisdom. It's been wonderful to have you.
Thank you so much, Kim.
The Sexy Mama Salon is now open for registration. This is my 8-week online program in all things holistic pregnancy and birth. This is the real education we all ought to have received, and a complete overhaul to everything you thought you knew about what pregnancy and birth was supposed to look like. We cover the full spectrum from preconception, conception, pregnancy, birth, and the early parenting years. You don't have to be pregnant to take this course. This information and techniques are applicable as excellent preparation for you and your intimate relationship, both with yourself and your partner, from sexual, emotional, energetic, and physical perspectives. Natural, easy, orgasmic pregnancy and birth are totally possible, and I will show you how. You can find the Sexy Mama Salon on kimanami.com/sexy-mama. Thank you so much for listening. If you haven't already, subscribe and also leave a review. And send someone else the gift of a healthy libido and an off-the-charts love life by sharing this episode with them. We'll be back next week, and in the meantime, many happy orgasms.